wherever you are right now, wherever you are on your life's journey, we welcome you this day into the community of the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I am the Reverend John Cullinan, your minister here. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people and gather together in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And we are grateful that this day you are able to take part in your own search with us during this virtual service. Please take a moment to ground yourself for worship. Block out all the other distractions in your kitchen or your living room. Take a deep breath in. Feel your feet planted firmly on the floor. Feel the earth draw you into its embrace. And breathe out. And let us begin worship. May we see all as it is, and may it all be as we see it. May we be the ones to make it as it should be. For if not us, who? If not now, when? This is answering the cry of justice with the work of peace. This is redeeming the pain of history with the grace of wisdom. This is the work we are called to do, and this is the call we answer now. To be the barrier and the bridge. To be the living embodiment of our principles. To be about the work of building beloved community. To be a people of intention and a people of conscience. Come, let us worship together. Please join with me now in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve life in fellowship, to the end that all peoples shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each and with all. For all our joys, all our sorrows, whether we share them with one another or we hold them close to our hearts, let us join together now in a spirit of prayer and reflection. Universal Spirit of life, God of many names, source of all being in which we live and breathe and have our being. We come together in prayer even though many of us struggle with what that means. We come together before that which is greater than us, although we struggle to say what it is. And so on this day, we pray for those things we struggle with, for the conflicts we feel within ourselves and between us and those we love. We pray for guidance, compassion, for the opening of a path. We pray for those things that give us joy and hope, for those things that we trust in, believe in, will sacrifice for. These are gifts of grace, and perhaps we need not define them in order to savor them. Rejoice in them. Be thankful for them. What we do know is that we gather in spirit this morning with all kinds of needs. Some are facing serious physical problems and are in need of healing. Others need healing of a different kind, emotional and spiritual. Some are facing family problems. Some are weary with the struggles of life and seek assurance that this will someday pass. Still others face financial difficulties and the specter of making difficult decisions for themselves and their families. For each of us, we speak the deepest prayers of our hearts in different ways, knowing that what it means for them to be answered will look and feel different for each of us. May we somehow this day be met at the point of our differences, and also in the places that we are one, of the same breath of life that courses through all living things. May we always hold in our hearts gratitude for those things that bless us with their presence, forgiveness for the ways we have turned from those blessings, and the willingness to open ourselves anew to this beautiful and hurting world. All this we pray in the names of those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Amen.
Hello. So for the time for all ages this morning, I have a question for you all. Have you ever said these words, "But I didn't mean to"? Maybe you have said this after something was broken or after a person got hurt by something you said or did. I know I have said this before for sure. After we say, "But I didn't mean to," what do we do next? This is a story about that exact situation. One day, me and my friend were throwing a frisbee in the park. I caught the frisbee and then threw it super fast back to my friend. But sometimes my aim is not always perfect. And the frisbee didn't go directly towards my friend, but instead it hit another person who was running on the sidewalk. They fell down and looked injured. Oh no! I felt so bad. It was my fault the frisbee hit that person. But I didn't mean to hit them. That was not my intention. But the person was still hurt, even if I didn't mean to hurt them. I ran over to them to see if they were okay. I listened to them explain where they were hurt. I then apologized and said how sorry I was and that I didn't mean to hit them, but I was here to help them. I then asked them what they needed and what I could do to help them. Could I call you an ambulance? Could I find a first aid kit? Could I find you an ice pack? Could I help you back up on your feet? Luckily, the person wasn't too injured and said that I could help them up and walk them to their car. This person said they had an ice pack at home they would use to put on the spot that was hit with the frisbee. I apologized again as the person got into their car. After the frisbee accident, I still felt bad for hitting that person. I didn't mean to hit them and hurt them, but that is what happened. Sometimes you will hear adults explain this as intent versus impact. I didn't mean to hit the person and hurt them. That was not my intent. However, the impact of what happened was that the person did get hurt, and the impact is what matters most. We have to check on the person who was hurt because our actions accidentally hurt them. We have to take responsibility for our actions that caused harm, even if it was an accident. Another situation that sometimes happens at school is that we have a new kid join our class. Maybe this kid moved here from a different country and has an accent when they talk. We hear other kids laughing when the new kid speaks. We might think the accent the person has sounds different too. So we laugh with our peers. We don't mean to hurt that person's feelings, but when the new kid hears us laughing, they start to cry. Uh-oh. Maybe you didn't mean to hurt the kid's feelings, but the impact of laughing did hurt the kid's feelings inside. What do we do next? We can do the same thing that we did for the person who was hit by the frisbee. We can go over to the kid and first apologize. Then we can listen to them speak about their feelings and speak about how laughing at them hurt them and how they moved here from a different country and how they just want to make friends. You can tell them then that you won't laugh at them again and that you can tell others not to laugh at them too. You can then invite them to play with you and your friends. In both the frisbee and the new kid situation, the impact of what our actions do to someone is what is really most important. We have to then take responsibility for our actions. So here are the 3 things we can do after we say, "But I didn't mean to." We can say sorry to the person that we harmed or whose property we damaged. We take responsibility. We can then listen to the person who we caused harm to. And then we can take action to help the person or ask them how we can help and make amends, make it better. So this week, maybe we can all, even adults too, practice these 3 easy things after a time where we didn't mean to cause harm. Say sorry, listen to the person who is impacted by our actions, and take action to make it better. Thanks for listening.
Came across a story recently via a podcast called Nevertheless, podcast intended for educators. The particular episode I stumbled across in transcripts had to do with designing programs that served communities in effective ways. And the episode opens up with a story about someone approaching a community problem with good intent, but not so good outcomes. A South African engineer, round about 1989, thought he'd figured out a way to make it safer and easier to access drinking water. At the time, there were 1 billion plus people around the world that did not have that access. And the engineer's idea was to tap into an energy source they hadn't used before: children. He designed a playground carousel, you know, the ones where you stand on and someone pushes it around. And as the children would play with it and swing around, it would activate a water pump and pull the groundwater out for everything. It was called the roundabout play pump. And it seemed like a good idea, and first world investors loved it, and they especially loved the images of laughing and smiling children playing joyfully in a playground while providing for their communities. But in the end, there was a problem, because nobody had ever talked to the people of the villages where they were installing these pumps if that would be a way they would prefer to get their water. And very often, they did not. Sometimes, children did not want to play. But in order to get the water, they had to, because people needed it. And so inadvertently, they had created situations of a sort of forced child labor in the process. And if the children weren't doing the pumping, it would have to fall to the older women and the mothers of the village, who usually did the water gathering for their communities and their families. And they found that those roundabout pumps were not very easy to use, very physically demanding. And on top of that, the pumps broke all the time, and they were very delicate and very expensive to fix. The whole thing was just incredibly inefficient and unpopular. And to top it all off, the pump stations did not solve the bigger problem of purifying the water to make it safe to drink. There were about 1,000 pumps like that installed by 2008, and by 2009 it became clear that none of this was working the way they intended, and the Play Pump Company responded to the issue by saying, we'll just invest in continuing to fix the existing pumps over and over and over again, without really taking in the rest of the lessons that were being learned in the process. Because it was too late at that point to expect people to change their lives and the ways they did things to adapt to this unpopular option. Now, most of us are not going to have an experience where a good intention we have has bad outcomes on quite that global of a scale. And I say that knowing today that a good percentage of my audience probably is working day to day on projects that have a global impact. But that aside, most of us experience the effects of good intent versus bad outcome, intent versus impact, on a much more personal level. It's a lot more like Tina's Frisbee story this morning. Either we have been the person with good intent, or we have been on the receiving end of somebody with good intentions and have felt hurt and confused and perplexed by what someone else has done for us or to us. It causes a lot of hurt and confusion and harm when our good intent doesn't quite match up to the expectations of the people we are acting towards. It causes confusion and harm. Now, let me be clear this morning that I'm not saying anything bad about good intent. Good intentions are necessary and good by their nature. It shouldn't stop us from acting in the world, trying to build the world we envision together. But I am cautioning that we have to be aware that intentions always have an impact, because we don't live in a vacuum. And we need to be aware that sometimes the response to those actions born out of our good intentions may have reactions that we weren't expecting, may have reactions that seem disproportionate to the good intent we put into them. And that is simply because we have no control over how others respond to us. Here's important lesson number one, a quick refresher in some precepts of emotional intelligence. We have to understand what we do have control over and what we do not have control over, what we can and cannot do in the emotional lives of ourselves and others. We cannot control another person's reaction or response to us, to our actions, to our words, to our intentions. We cannot control the lived experience they've had before they've come to us in this particular interaction, and we cannot control their emotional lives, simply because we cannot know fully another person's lived experience or the story they have lived up until now. But we can control our own actions and our responses to how people respond to us. Because when we cause emotional distress to someone, there are a lot of opportunities to have a moment of ouch. And those moments, even now, are more and more likely today as our awareness and our concept of who us really is expands and expands and admits more people of different worldviews and experiences and stations of life. We wind up with all of those boundaries and experiences and worldviews rubbing up against each other, sometimes in harmony and sometimes with a lot of friction. And when we hit those ouch moments, when the friction starts, it can be very awkward and very disorienting for us, especially when we mean well. I mean, let's face it, it sucks to be told you did something wrong. What you did hurt me, especially if we're meaning well. And often our response to that, to being informed of our wrongness, is shame. Probably one of the most negative emotions we can experience, and shame causes us to act in all sorts of ways. We might mask it with anger towards the person who has caused us shame, or we might lean into some defensiveness, pointing back to the nature of our intent in the first place, or some combination of all of those. Or we may try to cast blame for the hurt elsewhere, to some external force, or even back towards the person who is telling us they have been hurt. And sometimes, and I see this happen a lot, we get into the game of parsing words instead of hearing them from one another. It is important to know that we do not know the totality of being of any other person. We do not know the totality of their stories. And so when we act out of good intent and it all goes awry, the response we receive from our point of view might seem extreme. It might seem completely disproportionate to what we've done or said or intended. But we need to understand that everyone's emotional responses to us, to the world around them, come from very deep, very real places. Often from places of deep, deep wounds they have felt, received from the world around them. And we can only control our response to their response. So the question is, do we approach this interaction that has gone awry, when our intent has bad impact, do we approach that response with defensiveness or out of curiosity? I have been, over the last year or so now, developing an internal practice for myself with my own emotional life and emotional intelligence. I tend to be a reactive person, although I bottle it up. I still feel it deeply. But I've been working over the last few years on being able to step aside from that emotion a little bit, to become an observer of my own life. Learning to say to myself, oh, I'm feeling that. What's that about? What's causing that response? And it's been extraordinarily helpful to me, because sometimes it helps me set aside the immediate gut responses. It helps me make a connection when someone does something that triggers a bad reaction in me, to be able to set aside that initial reaction and get to the heart of why I feel that way in those situations, and not immediately turn it back on the other person. But I've come to realize through that practice that I can also apply that towards others, because I cannot control their emotional responses. I can only control my response to them. To take in the emotion being expressed, not the words at the surface, but the emotion, and say, oh, you are feeling something. You're feeling something deep, and I have to assume it is very real to you. It comes from a genuine place, whatever place of woundedness or experience it's coming from. I wonder why you feel that. And I wonder what part I played in this moment of interaction to feed into that place of hurt. One example that I can point to right now in our interactions in this day and age, and one that I know that I struggle with and many others struggle with, is the subject of pronouns when it comes to our transgender, non-binary friends and neighbors. We need to accept that people should be called what they want to be called. At our best, I hope that's what we are striving towards, to give people the respect they deserve for expressing who they are to us. And I also admit that learning new pronouns and using them correctly with people is very hard to learn sometimes, especially when we've set a picture in our minds of who this person is that might not match up with who they are telling us we are. I struggle with the they singular pronoun, for instance, especially when someone presents to me as one particular gender or another. And thankfully, my friends who I encounter when I do that are forgiving up to a point. They hand me some grace. I'm able to say, whoops, sorry, correct myself and move on. And slowly but surely I build up my learning until it becomes automatic. But not everybody is that forgiving on the receiving end of a misused pronoun or a misused name. And we shouldn't have to expect the grace and the forgiveness that is offered freely. Because sometimes when we slip up, when we use the wrong pronoun, when we use the wrong name, in our own mind, we've just made a slip. We have committed an accident if we are acting out of our best intentions. But on the opposite end of that equation, what a transgender or a non-binary person might be hearing is a lack of acceptance of who they are. And in the real world of people living out as transgender and non-binary in our world, that lack of acceptance very, very often can lead to physical harm, to a threat to their very existence. And at that point, in that interaction, no matter what our intent is, we are now having two different conversations, my conversation partner and I. I might be struggling with vocabulary and having a debate about that, but on the other side, my friend, my neighbor, is making an argument for their mere right to exist. And so the response coming towards us might seem disproportionate, might seem unbalanced, but it is coming from a very real place just by the nature of the lived experience of people and how their world plays out on a day-to-day basis. So how do we respond in the response we can control? Do we double down on our intent, perhaps? Do we get defensive and point back to our intent? Do we keep trying to work on that and excuse ourselves? Do we do like the folks at the Play Pump Company did and just keep pouring more money and more money into the unit that we built, that we believed was built with good intentions? If we approach from a defensive stance, we're really losing something in the moment, though. We're losing a chance to learn the underlying lesson of the emotional response coming our way. We don't get to be admitted a little closer into someone's world to come to a sense of understanding. But instead of doubling down, if we double back, if we go back to the source of our intent, to look at what it was we were really hoping to accomplish, if we approach it with some curiosity, we have a chance to learn something about the life of the person we are interacting with, to learn something about the need to be conscious of the impact that we're having in any given moment, to learn that we have an opportunity in that moment if we approach it with humility and a little bit of being abashed. We have an opportunity to change something within us about how we act on our intents, to make it more likely that our intent aligns with the impact we meant to have in the first place, and to the impact that the person on the other end might want to receive. It's that finding of the sweet spot between intent and impact that we're really searching for here. That is the goal. Instead of working on self-justification and bending over backwards to make ourselves still in the right because we had the right goal all along, instead, in looking for that sweet spot, we are working on relationship. Because friends, all human transactions and interactions are relational. We cannot tug on one strand of the web without having some kind of impact on everything else in the web that surrounds us, even if we cannot see it. And that means that every relationship we are in, no matter how brief it might be, no matter how trivial it might seem, needs to be approached as if we are doing the work of care for the web. Take the interactions you might have just doing your shopping in a day, heading over to Smith's or going down to Target. Some of the briefest relationships I have ever had in my life are with the cashiers that I interact with as I am checking out my goods. But I know how I am with them in that moment of relationship still has an impact on how they go about their day. And we're seeing that to great effect right now as people get more and more frustrated with how the service industry goes right now, with people leaving work, with worker shortages. We see how people respond and make it worse, anger and violence. But those interactions I have, those brief relationships with people in areas of service, serving me in commerce and retail, in restaurants, on the other end of the phone, those relationships in that moment are as important as the relationships I am working to maintain on a day-to-day basis with my closest intimates. We're all in relationship. The question is, what kind of relationship are we seeking? There are a lot of relationships that are based on needs, either the needs of others or our own needs. Sometimes it goes in one direction, in the direction of altruism, where we are taking care of others' needs without any thought of benefit or needs of our own. And at the other extreme, relationships of an egotism, where we are focused merely on our needs and how other people are objects that can serve us. Some relationships are based around power. In one extreme, not extreme. At its best, it's a relationship of give and take, who has authority, who has expertise, who has the ability in a given situation while in the relationship. And at its worst, it's a relationship of trying to maintain power over another. And there are relationships of mutuality, relationships where we have reached a state of being true partners, true equals in the interaction, and we're able to discover together and to make together, to build together. Now, I'll admit right now, human beings are complex, and all those various states of relationship can exist within one one-on-one relationship. And those relationships of needs and those relationships of power that might happen within that aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. Sometimes we need to take care of another. Sometimes we need to ask for what we need in a relationship. Sometimes we need to say, I've got this, I know what I'm doing. Sometimes we need to, in a relationship, figure out just what the organization chart looks like so we can avoid stepping on one another's toes. But if we linger too long in any of those facets of relationship and needs and empower, ultimately, we end up straining the relationship we are trying to maintain. We can't linger in need and power. We need to return and intend to return to that sense of mutuality, to that sense of partnership and equality. That is when we are at our best, when we can regain that equilibrium. We return to that mutuality. That's where all the good work really starts to happen. So we ask, what kind of relationship are we seeking with our intentions and our actions? Often our good intentions come from a place of, I need to do this thing to get that outcome. without due consideration for who might be on the receiving end of that action or who might be in the pathway of the good intention that we didn't even realize was there at the moment. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the nature of intention and how the things we desire, the outcomes we might want, aren't necessarily our true intentions, don't necessarily reflect the true self and the true community we are trying to be. Very often what we desire in a moment distracts us from the deeper intention, the deeper truth, the deeper outcome we are trying to achieve. And so rather than what can I do to get that outcome, better to ask, what do we intend to build together? To have the other person mapped into the equation before we even start. We've all heard the old adage, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And that's all well and good, but it misses part of the equation. As one dear friend and colleague said to me years ago, give fish, teach fish, not really the question. Ask a person if fish are what are needed in this moment, and then if fish are what is needed, maybe sit down and fish with them. But take into account what the other person needs in their interactions with us. Going back to providing clean water around the world, the Nevertheless podcast continues with the story of another company, a company called Evidence Action, that has a project called Dispensers for Safe Water, because globally 2 million people die each year from drinking contaminated water. And what they found by being on the ground of the communities they were trying to serve and studying how they went about their water gathering and how about they went about their day, what they found was that making it convenient to get to the chlorine that they needed to disinfect the water is what would work best. Because at that point, to get chlorine, you had to make a trip to the store, if you remember to make the trip to the store, and buy it there and take it home and chlorinate and wait for it all to work. And what Evidence Action did was to place blue tanks near the pumps and other water sources that people were walking to already, and often walking for miles to. And you could, at those blue bins, turn a spigot and get a perfectly measured dose of chlorine in your water vessel and fill that up. And by the time you had walked back home with your water and agitated the chlorine in the water, as you walked home, your water was safe to drink. They went into the community and studied how the community did things and studied how to serve and get something needed without trying to create a whole new way of doing things so that people would adapt and respond and take on to the solution. To make good on our good intentions, it falls to us to understand the worldview, the attitude, the culture, the story of those we hope to build relationship with, those we hope to build a world together with. So, crafting a solution that fits existing community, the existence of the person as they are, is the goal. And understanding so that in our intent, we honor the lived experience of another and the state of the world as they understand it. Now, humans being human, We know that relationships have complexity. There are many pitfalls and stumbling blocks that we might fall into very easily if we are not paying attention to the totality of that relationship. Those ouch moments, they are not completely avoidable. But the chance of them are lessened if we can stay aware of the nature of the relationship we are in and the nature of the relationship we are seeking to build together, and are lessened if we are checking back in all the time with the spark of our true deep self, with the living of intention that we are trying to live out in the world in the deeper sense. And even if we're practicing that, we'll still stumble, and the inevitable ouch moments will come. Someone will say, that thing you said, that thing you did, it really hurt me. It really made me feel unsafe. It really makes it hard for me to trust you. Take a step aside. Look at the truth of the emotions that are happening in that moment. Hear the truth of the other expressed within the words and the emotions they are conveying to you. Step back from our own shame, our anger, our confusion, our need to justify ourselves, and ask, why is this the response I am getting in this moment? And what was my role in bringing that response about? And what is my role in making that better? Examine what you can change within yourself. Examine what you can control in those moments of relationship so that you have those chances to better align your intent with the desired impact. Our work, especially in a time when those ouch moments are going to come fast and furious sometimes, as we're growing into the world we wish to see, our work is to get over ourselves from time to time and do what we can and what is in our control to return to that place of mutuality. May it be so. Our offering for the month of January goes to the Esperanza shelter in Espanola and their work in the community on our behalf to help people trying to get out of situations of domestic violence. Please use the Givelify app to make your donation. Select Esperanza Shelter as your gift for this month. Give as generously as you can, and may what you give bring you joy. life shine upon us and out from within us, and be gracious to us and bring us peace. For this is the day. This is the one wild and precious life we have been given. So let us all find a way to rejoice and be glad in it. Go in peace.